how does Orchard Global benefit from having like a Douglas Smith as the head of global affairs? Because obviously you have a tremendous amount of experience in public service, like all those connections, all that knowledge. How does Orchard Global, like, how are they? What's the alpha of having you on the team?
I mean, I think it's, look, I mean, I'm a small cog on an amazing organization. I think, what our CEO and our CIO, have sort of realized, data wins the war. And they've done an amazing job of, whether it's people like me or currency experts, uh, you pick an area of searching the world over to find these people that then come together and do that. I mean, during crises, when I was DHS and I would be sitting in the situation room, there wasn't just an expert, right? It was a collection. I mean, it was the most valuable lesson I think I ever learned from President Clinton is, while without a doubt he was always the smartest guy in the room, he desperately tried to surround himself with really, really smart people who hopefully could come up with see something he wasn't seeing. And, in a firm like ours, I mean, that's, Paul, our CEO, I mean, that's kind of his mantra, is like, he wants everyone around that table because someone's going to see something that someone else hasn't seen. And, I think one of the things that I bring is that I did not have a financial services background. So I did not get, and I don't mean this in a mean way, I didn't get brainwashed by people on Wall Street. I can look at it with a fresh approach, see it from a different angle that sometimes some of our incredibly smart sort of analysts who have been, working on the street for 30 years might not be seeing. And, I think that's, kind of our secret sauce is, how do we bring people with different perspectives into this as we try to solve these incredibly complex challenges?
Well, I mean, it's in the name, global affairs. You're head of the global affairs. So if you're trying to be a global company, you need somebody that's worked in global affairs.
What we try to do is recognize, we live in, anyone in the financial services business lives in an insanely regulated industry. And who is regulating it? Governments. And so, we don't lobby, we don't, I'm not saying lobbying's a bad thing, we just don't do that. Our mantra is data collection. Like, how do we have the best contacts in the most diverse spaces to be able to collect the most interesting information that we can then use and share internally, but also share back to our clients and help them make the best decisions they can. And kind of that's our secret sauce. The space, there are lots of amazing financial services firms in this country and in the world. Our secret sauce is that we believe, access to decision makers and kind of listening and collecting quietly the data points that they're thinking about and the challenges that they're facing gives us a strategic advantage over our competitors.
Where do you think AI falls into all this?
Boy, I mean, it's
another 3 hour.
As a father of a freshman in college, I think about AI all the time. I think there's certain things that AI is amazing for and incredibly useful, but it can't beat this. AI didn't introduce me to Ryan. Like, I met Ryan at a cocktail party at a fancy event in Dallas, and we became friends. And then we can bounce ideas off each other. AI can't do that. So the things that give us our competitive advantage are 100% based on dozens and dozens of years of relationships, and the ability to pick up a phone, for our guys, whether like in our structured credit business, say you've been dealing with these guys for 20 years. AI is not going to be able to get on the phone and find that name at Bank X. It's the fact that they've built these relationships. Now, can AI help you bang out a fast press release and do a million of other things? Can AI in the national security space be unbelievably helpful in sorting data and addressing things very fast? Absolutely. But I think in our space, at least for the foreseeable future, important role to play, but you can't replace, someone who's been at that game for 30 years. Just sort of the institutional knowledge they've built up and the ability to pick up a phone, like, hey, I need to make this trade happen, or I need this relationship. AI is not driving that for you. It's got to be, you're the king of the relationship. Like, you've got a Rolodex bigger than I do.
I don't know if that's true.
And it's that, like, how do you connect those dots and bring the right people into that problem set to solve it?
I think that, is a great example of why relationships over transactions is so important, and really, excuse me, is really leaning into uh, having a relationship with somebody over just like the transactional, like, what can I get out of Douglas? What can I get out of Lane? What can I get out of Ryan? And because I think it's so, at least for me, it's so obvious when somebody comes out left field and take this podcast, for example. It's like, we're still fairly new. We've only had 7 episodes released so far. And already people that maybe weren't, I wouldn't say they were rude, but they were just like, oh, okay. And now they're like, oh, Ryan, and it's just so obvious where it's like, why weren't you like that a week ago before this thing released? Before I had a episode with Douglas, before I had an episode with Michael Levy or whatever.
So my grandfather, that's podcast, we could probably say whatever we want on these kinds of things. My grandfather used to say, careful the ass you kick today because you may have to kiss it tomorrow. And my grandfather had a 6th grade education, built a unbelievably successful global company on a 6th grade education, and he did it 100% on a smile. Like, his word was his bond, and I think, to answer your question, AI isn't that.
Yeah.
AI is cool and it's helpful, and like, I'll admit it, I've been monkeying around with ChatGPT. It's kind of fun to see what it can do for you real quick. You gotta bang out a quick letter on something. That's perfect. And you gotta solve a complex challenge, and you need to be able to pick up the phone and talk to Frank. I mean, it's like, a lot of people are giving Jamie Dimon crap about forcing people back to work. Look, I think if you're our age, we spend a lifetime at building relationships, right? And they're there. You and I can still lean back on that. You can be working from here, from wherever, you can lean on that. I think, as young adults, graduate college, like, we were doing them a massive disservice by not putting them in these community experiences. I mean, look what happened during COVID when these poor kids were learning, their bedroom was their gym, their math hall, the lunch hall. And so I think it's a happy balance, and that it's still, when it's all said and done, I mean, the human interaction is that what gets it done. As you walk, back to walking down the halls here, I mean, you think AI wasn't going to make the Continental Congress happen. I mean, that was forces of personality. That was Benjamin Franklin, Adams, Washington, Jefferson, these guys, Patrick Henry, like, all around a table, like, knowing each other, trusting each other, having gone through a war together, and their ability to do it. I mean, it's why, I think we do a massive disservice in this country by not requiring mandatory public service. I'm not saying you don't have to be a soldier. You can fix a bridge, you can do that. I mean, it's why people always question, how could President Reagan and Speaker Tip O'Neill, like, go at it during the day, and at 5 o'clock be on the veranda having a martini? They had the shared experience of having fought in World War II together. They had a common language. They understood what it meant to put country before themselves. And, that's, if you can ask me the downside of AI, the downside is perhaps we're going to drive a greater wedge upon that we're going to lose track of the larger, sort of dialogue, a common language that we can relate to, beyond yours and my love of barbecue. We got to figure out ways to bring that back and to reestablish the trust, so that the greatest minds at, not calling favorites, but like Google has the comfort level to call the cyber experts at the National Security Agency and say, hey guys, we just noticed something, you better pay attention, and vice versa.
One of the things through this conversation that stuck home is AI drives transactions, but like conversations builds relationships. So if you're only relying on AI, you'll never have those relationships. And you brought up Reagan. I think one of the most beautiful examples, and this ties into earlier conversations about discourse, is the battle of like Adams and Jefferson. Just extremely. I was at one of those like a book reading a couple months ago, and it brought about, everybody gives credit to Washington for the peaceful transition of power, and there was always going to be peace because there was nobody ever going to fight him. So give credit to where's credit due for Washington for giving up power. But the peaceful transaction of power should really be credited to Adams, because Adams and Jefferson had a very contentious election. So when Jefferson won, Adams was peacefully left. But further of that conversation, which I wanted to get to, was there was potential violence. Like he left the city to prevent violence. But 20 years later, when Adams' wife Abigail passed away, Jefferson wrote one of the most beautiful condolence letters, and I recommend everybody on the internet, yourselves, to go look it up. It's only like a paragraph long, but it's one of those things where it's like, I didn't know a human could write so beautifully to another human about the passing of his wife. And it was just like, I mean, it's literally beautiful. It's on the internet. But but my point to bring that up is 20 years before they was very contentious. And I think those conversations of building, because the lead up to that was they had 20 years of writing each other letters back and forth. But that's conversations builds those bridges.
I mean, the modern day example of that is I encourage everyone to go back and rewatch Vice President Al Gore's concession speech after the hugely contested election. That's the modern day example of it. I mean, what he said, I watched it again recently. It's truly moving. I mean, how he 100% put country ahead of him. And he recognized that what was happening, and he stood aside. I mean, I got to watch, many years later, spent a bunch of time traveling around with President Clinton and President Bush 43 as they were out there jointly, raising money for Hurricane Katrina, for 9/11 museums, and to watch these two guys, and there was like, when it was all said and done, they were just like, they were two bubbas. And like deep, you could see, this wasn't made up. This wasn't like, oh, we got to come together and like, oh, you're the Republican, I'm the Democrat. These were guys who were deeply fond of each other, deep respect. Watching, I remember when President Bush 41 passed away. I mean, President Clinton, he saw him as a father figure. Yes, he had beat him in a very contested, heated election. It's pretty much the day he died. President Clinton revered what President Bush 41 had stood for, his legacy of service. People forget, Ambassador to China, head of the Central Intelligence Agency. This is a guy who was deep. He could have done anything in his life. He born on third base. This guy, anything, and yet he chose to put country before everything. And I think it was a message. I was always moved by it when I was around those guys, just seeing, there was teasing and tax policy and this, that, and the other. But it was always this common lexicon of how, without a unity of purpose and around public service, and we're just going to drive the bus right off the road.
We bash social media but we talk about the downsides of that. But I think the positive side is being able to see some of those relationships in real time. Like one of my favorite things, to your point on this, is seeing the relationship of President Bush and Michelle Obama.
Yeah.
It's just cute. Yeah. It's just fun to watch, so.
And then the whole thing, and I can't remember what it was, but he would always reach in his pocket and like pull out a lifesaver or something to it was like this whole like gag they had. I don't know how it started, but to your point, it was incredibly cute. This whole, I was like cough drop or I don't know what, it must have dated to something that had happened. But if you watch them, whenever they get together at things, it would always be like this little passing back and forth. There were a couple school kids handing notes in the classroom.
Yeah, I love seeing that.